Good afternoon, everyone. We're in the committee of the whole meeting of Tuesday, February 27th. Held in Squamish, Away. Welcome to the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. There's an agenda in front of the committee. A motion to adopt the agenda moved by Councilor Kent, seconded by Councilor Rice. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have one item on the agenda, and that is the Marine Strategy Phase 2. And pass it over to Sarah.
Great, thank you so much, Madam Mayor and Council, and for those folks that are
Madam Mayor?
Madam Mayor. My name is Sarah McJannet. I'm a senior planner with the District of Squamish, and with me today is Sandra Basego. She's with Pacifica Blue Consulting and has been working with us to develop the marine strategy and undertake all the engagement for its creation. So today's update is our mid-project check-in with Council, and our plan today is to reiterate the Marine Action Strategy purpose and process and the key deliverables that we are working towards. We would like to also summarize the engagement and the inputs that we've been collecting through stages 2 and 3. Thirdly, present a working draft of the Marine Action Strategy, and then outline next steps for us in refining and finalizing the strategy, including additional engagement work that is in front of us. So if Council is okay with this, we're just going to jump in and kindly request that we save discussion to the end. We've got some specific questions and would like to receive some input and direction from Council, but of course we're open to respond to any clarifying questions as we go. So to jump right in, with respect to the desired outcomes for this work, the Marine Strategy has grown out of a critical need to work better together across government, sectors, agencies, and the community to address a number of marine items that have not seen our full attention over time. So really we're trying to mobilize and catalyze some shared leadership in the marine realm. Early on, this project was really focused around identifying and trying to address a number of acute issues and threats. For example, derelict vessels within the Mount Blind Channel. But as we evolve and bigger picture, we're wanting to be proactive in addressing the things that matter for the Squamish marine realm. And the central objective, as I said, is to kickstart and mobilize shared leadership. We want to do this by identifying together marine focus areas and prioritize actions that we can take to protect and maximize our waterfront resources and assets for the long term. And also this will help us inform and align our decision-making efforts and coordinate action within the community. We don't have control and exclusive authority within the marine realm over every aspect, but at the local level we do uphold community interests and we work in the public interest, so we do have a key role in bridging with the community and all government agencies and stakeholders. We wanted to reiterate, this is not another plan. The community is always saying, are you doing another plan? It's not another plan. It's really a framework for action, and we already have a lot of plans. We've got waterfront, downtown plans, sub-area plans. We've got an OCP that we've just updated. We've got technical pieces like the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan, but where the Marine Action Strategy comes in, it's very much conceived as a strategic piece that helps bring all these aspects together. And so it's about the pieces working together for the greater whole. So as an example, how does our sea diking work with the needed boat ramps and public access and water use services, and how are we actually managing all these things together? The marine strategy is not scoped or able to address and resolve every single marine issue that we might face, but it does present a bit of a platform for us to identify the issues, flesh them out, rank them in terms of priority, and provide guidance as to when, who, with who, and how we can move towards resolving. And at the end of the project, we're going to have a deliverable, a strategy document, an implementation plan that will guide our actions over the short, medium, and long term. I'm going to turn it over to Sandra, who's going to talk to our process and what we've been up to.
Yes, so we developed a 5-stage process. The first one being started in October, stage 1 on planning and identification. And that was a fun time where we did a lot of background research, looking at the accomplishments. We was trying to summarize a quick accomplishments report. I don't know if it's been published yet, but anyway, many pages of the great things that's happened in Squamish. But what that did was it started bringing forward some of the key issues, and then we coupled that with informant interviews, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So from October to November, we were really setting the stage with designing the engagement process. Stage 2, which we just completed, and we're sort of kind of morphing into stage 3, was developing the directions, and you would have seen those in the document. And that we'll talk about what happened in that stage, but that involved key engagement with stakeholders and the public. Right now we're in prioritization and action planning. We're just going to be starting that in stage 3 now, and that'll take us to blending in with stage 4 into February, March, and April, where we're going to be looking at resourcing. Right now in stage 3, we'll talk about that in a moment as well, but the key piece there will be going back to the stakeholders to discuss the action plan. And then we'll finish off with stage 4, where the council will eventually see a draft, refined plan that will be discussing the resourcing opportunities there. And eventually we'll move into implementation. I just want to, maybe in the next slide, we'll just talk about the different stages. Okay, this is a little bit more detail of the engagement. Okay, there's a bit of a new slide here, but one thing, one thing I did leave out that's not actually on there was we were lucky enough to corral the staff in a cross-departmental team. So we had a staff working group where they vetted the background research and helped us design the framework. So what you see here has been vetted also through the staff departmental working group. And then here's the list of the various engagement processes. So we had the informant interviews with knowledge holders, people who have expertise in the community. And in fact, I have some slides that'll go into each of these. So just in summary here, we had the informant interviews, the focus group, the first focus group session with stakeholders. It was an invitational session in December, early December. And then earlier this year in January, we had the Public Marine Forum. And we'll talk about that in a bit. That was quite exciting. Sarah did some innovative stuff there. And at the same time, we also launched a marine survey. So that just closed last week, I believe, a couple weeks ago. So yeah, and just going through each of them. So it was interesting. We started with the idea to interview about 8 to 10 people, but I got really excited, and we reached out to about 24, and I ended up talking to at least 16, and two people were busy and sent me in their email responses. So we had really good, rich feedback from 18 knowledge holders in the community. And these were people from industry, landowners, development realm, recreation folks, and stewardship. So that's sort of the broad buckets of people I reached out. And the questions we asked were, hey, what's important to you? How are we going to address them? What is your sense of the vision for the marine realm? What's a marine environmental vision for Squamish? And what are values that are important to you? And what are the priorities? And any other insights that we should know about? So this is the kind of thing we ended up with, a 30-page document practically of lots of great feedback. That helped us, in essence, design the next session, which we can turn to the next slide, the focus group. So and some of the people who attended the focus group were people we interviewed. So we had 26 participants, and you can see the cross range there. So there was industry, and then there was business representation. We had a provincial health representative there, recreation and land development, and tourism as well, stewardship. What we did here was, again, from the interviews and from the background research that Sarah had done and staff had done, we identified 4 focus areas. And at this point, we were calling them issue areas or broad buckets. And you will see that they've managed to survive through the processes. And I won't go into details, but we had 4 breakout tables one on governance, one on the waterfront gateway, one on the marine economy, and there was a table on coastal ecosystems. And at each of the tables, people were able to choose what topic they wanted to attend. And they got to do several rounds, so we had a lot of good, rich feedback. And they were looking at what were the big goals on that table topic, and how do we achieve them, and what are the barriers and opportunities, and what are some opportunities for collaboration as well. And that's an image from the event. It was held here. And the Marine Forum was held in January. We had 60 people attend, and in fact, it was a 2-part session. And it was, I guess it was standing room only at the Adventure Center in the theater. And we called it the Salt Life Panel, and the idea was to talk about what people do with those folks that live, work, play, and volunteer the time in and around the water. And the idea was to give a breadth. In fact, we had 13 people give a presentation. Sarah will go into that in a moment. And that was followed by Q&A. And then that was followed, actually, that whole session went a little bit closer to 9, but we still ended up with 45 minutes. People didn't leave at 10. It was tough to close the session, but it was quite exciting, and we ended up with a display session in the expo, soliciting input on the focus areas, the objectives, the actions, and also even the vision and the guiding principles. And the survey was launched that same day, so that was January the 24th.
Great.
Yeah.
I wanted to give a little shout out to our inaugural Salt Life panel. As Sandra mentioned, there were 13 people, their names are up here, that came together. It was really a great cross-section of the community. They were all linked by their knowledge, their passion, their livelihoods, and their work in marine areas. So it was kind of a neat idea to bring them together. Really, the genesis of the idea of the Salt Life panel was, if we're trying to build shared leadership around marine matters, we really wanted to build and start with building shared understanding. So there was no better way than getting a bunch of people together, having them share their passions, their challenges, their needs, their hopes, and create some dialogue. And it was very squishy, but we're getting everybody in the boat. So I have a bunch of images that I'm just going to show you, that just to walk you through the Salt Life panel very, very briefly, so you can just get a flavor of it. I think we had a couple of counselors there, but it was a really, really fun, engaging event, and we heard great feedback from the community. They said, hey, we've never done something like this before. This was great. And so we were very honored to have Randall Lewis of Squamish Nation, also of the Squamish River Watershed Society, with us to talk about the significance of the estuary, talked about historic village sites of the Squamish Nation, and sort of a historical look at habitat restoration efforts over time and the pulse of life, as he says, returning to Howe Sound. Chessie Knight was with him. She's co-chair of the Watershed Society and a biologist, and she expanded on some of the restoration funding that the Watershed Society has received for an upcoming project to improve juvenile salmon fish access to the Central Estuary. That was followed by Jeff Watterson of the Squamish Wind Sport Society, and he highlighted for everyone the world-class wind and water assets that we enjoy, and talked about tourism and economic impacts of wind sports that have really grown exponentially since the 80s. Ian Lowe of the Squamish Paddling Club joined us to talk about growth in paddle sports, club events, and also to boast that Squamish is the only Canadian stop on the World Surf Ski Championships that are being hosted again this July. Ian talked a lot about challenges for recreation access and facilities and different needs that paddlers have in the community. Just a different photo of the juxtaposition of different things going on in Howe Sound. Norm Hahn joined us to talk about building connections, community connections to the water, and his business, which is to provide paddle expedition and safety training out in the Sound. He runs a program called Coastal Stoke, and it's been quite successful. Catherine Lee Smith is our wharfinger of the Squamish Harbour Authority. She provided a bit of a snapshot of our local small craft harbour management activities and facilities, talked about the Clean Marine Program certification that they're working towards, the importance of the wharf to marine tourism, and the idea that over time we're hoping to consider Squamish as more than a destination, but a really a starting point for a lot of marine adventure. Wayne Moffat is the Commodore for the Squamish Yacht Club, and he provided a nice snapshot of the activities that the Yacht Club runs and different challenges and opportunities. We also had Scott Shaw McLaren, who volunteers and provided perspective from RCM SAR, Marine Search and Rescue. Entirely community-funded efforts. They have 17 trained crew and 9 new recruits. They're on call 24/7, and they're on the search for long-term space. So we provided some really neat snapshots of the work that they do. We also had Jeff Levine, who talked about work in the last year out in the channel, removing creosote pilings, removing derelict vessels, and working with Transport Canada to demarcate the navigable channel. Here's some more photos from that activity. Then we also had an interesting perspective from Steve Foffenoff. He is a coastal engineer, and he provided some perspective on the work to implement sea decking in the Manicouagan Blind Channel and within the downtown for us to address coastal flood protection for the long term given sea level rise and changing climate. Kim Stegman-Lowe talked to the importance of the port and all the intermodal connections. We also had Mike Sheehan from BC Marine Logistics. So his work is around marine safety, emergency response planning, and they have a very large marine component of business within Howe Sound and the Sunshine Coast. So he talked a little bit more about what that looks like, his day-to-day. And then we finished with Brian Shear of Squamish Forestry. It's a joint venture with Squamish Nation, and he provided some great perspective around the forest industry, the different forest flows and the needs, log handling, barging, and the like. So that provides a bit of a snapshot. It was a great event. We did try and film it, although the audio is not very good. So I'm working with communications to see if we can get that up on our website.
Great. So following the Salt Lake panel, we had the expo, and this is an example of, well, you will see this in the math strategy, but we put the posters up of various focus areas, and we're able to get good feedback in each focus area and the objectives and the strategic directions and the emerging actions. And I think they're not in the same order as in the document that you have. So very much you can see that the document's not polished yet. It's very much a working document. But just to give you a sense, though, not looking at the numbering, that people comment on the governance and shared leadership, which is about mobilizing the shared leadership of the community, not just the district. And this is about coordination and good governance. Marine economy is about supporting a thriving marine economy and a working waterfront. So we use a lot of the words from existing plans as well as from the engagement process. And the idea that the waterfront is a working waterfront in harmony with social and cultural and recreational uses and future economic aspirations. And coastal ecosystems, of course, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have a functioning and equally thriving coastal ecosystem. And this is about supporting the stewardship that does exist, that has always existed, and also continued protection of the marine environment. And the Marine Gateway. And this one's an interesting one. This is that interface between the land and water. This is the focus area that celebrates Squamish as a mountain seaside community. And yet there's cross linkages with all of these. So although the Marine Gateway at the moment seems to focus a lot on culture and recreation and the social aspects, it's tied to marine economy. It's tied to the ecosystem, it's tied to good governance. And so we're going to make sure we tell that story a little better. But so this is where we're at right now. I'll just keep going here. And then, so that sort of finishes off the Expo public forum. And the Marine Survey, we just took a peek in it, both of us. We've had 36 complete responses, lots of good feedback. So it tended to be, well, most everyone is from Squamish, so you can see the breadth, a lot of folks from the recreation sector and stewardship and business and industry, all the way down to local government. And some of these folks I could tell when I read the feedback that they've been part of the process all along, so it's great because they're providing information like what we've missed, typos. Yes, we've made some boo-boos here and there, but the point is that they're following along in the process. They're in with us. And again, you can see that they provided inputs to the whole document. And here is the table of contents. So I thought just to give you a sense of, for those that may not have seen the document yet, just to give you an outline that in essence we have an introduction, there's a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threat. That was one of the typos. We have that the opportunities and threats switched around. We're going to fix that. But the point is, we wanted to lay the foundation for a great document that looks to now and into the future. So Sarah's been working with myself and through the engagement in developing the vision, shared values as guiding principles. So she'll talk about that in a moment, and then I'll talk about the focus areas and then the rest of the document.
So we did want to build a bit of a working vision for the marine action strategy, and really it's to build on our community overarching vision that's articulated and has been affirmed through our official community plan. Sorry, it's hard a little bit to see with the white on the blue text, but essentially it's about supporting and celebrating our connection to the ocean, sustaining the coastal community across generations, and responsibly stewarding shared resources, enhancing natural systems of how sound so they thrive in tandem with industry, economy, tourism, and recreation, and with access for all. So just sort of a nice statement. We're going to be getting feedback on the vision. But even more importantly, I think are some of the shared principles that we were trying to surface through the strategy. And these are really principles that we can take to heart and reflect community values that will help us and offer or be a bit of a touchstone to influence our actions over time. And so these were actually principles that surfaced through discussion and inputs in community, as well as sort of some good practices. And so we came up with 5. So the first one that the whole marine strategy is framed around is that notion of shared leadership. So recognizing we've got the marine is a shared resource, we have shared responsibility for actively and sustainably stewarding it. Greater engagement, greater degree of working together is only going to serve us better. The second principle is waterfront for all. This was actually something that even was articulated back in the early 90s through our Mamquam Blind Channel sub-area plan, and really it's recognizing there's a variety of uses and users in the marine environment, and it's about how we can be respectfully coexisting within the marine realm, being compatible, trying to balance public and private uses, and ongoing revitalization, and ultimately that our waterfront is vibrant, that it can be enjoyed by everyone safely and accessibly. And then we also have a principle around systems thinking, so trying to bring focus to the sort of the marine area, providing natural capital, or the idea of ecosystem services. So these are really valuable for storm protection, for our health, and that we are working in an environment that is complex and within a bigger system. And then the notion of being future focused and adaptive, so that our activities, we plan ahead. And then finally, a principle around healthy, restorative, and sustainable. Kind of group those. And these are drafts, so would love your feedback. The notion, the 5th principle, is really the notion that our interaction with and access to the natural environment is important for human health and wellness, and that the notion of leaving things better than when we found them. So that idea of really caring for the natural marine environment over the long term. So that's what we came up with so far. And then I'll turn it over to Sandra to talk a little bit about the framework for the actions.
Yeah, we wanted to keep it simple. The framework is designed around those broad buckets, the broad focus areas, and winnows down to focused actions. So at the moment, we have this very structured matrix. It definitely, what you're seeing is a working document. It may not look like that in the final document, or we may morph that and enhance it. But at the moment, we want to make sure that for a focus area, what are the key objectives we're trying to achieve? How are we going to achieve them through those strategic directions? And then what are the actions? And then eventually we'll start to work on, well, hey, if we're saying this, who's going to help us? Is it the district? Who else is leading? And then, by when do we want to do this? So the prioritization. And so that's kind of crystallized there. A much more detailed framework is mentioned in the document. I was a little ambitious with these next 4 slides. So Sarah said, just keep it really short and sweet. And I guess I wanted this to be a standalone slide deck that if someone didn't have the document, they could look at this. But what I'll point out is that in the first focus area on governance and shared leadership, we wanted to make sure from hearing all the breadth of ideas that we've had one section that was about good governance and coordination of governance and leadership. So those are the things we should see in there. Things like something about shared governance, something about leadership, and support all the regional initiatives that are going on. And then something around the uses and activities in the water. So the sub-bullets there speak to that. So I won't go into the details right now, but we wanted to make sure that one bucket, one focus area looked at things like enforcement and compliance and the regulations. So that would be a new area of work in the community, in addition to the other pieces. And what I should point out in this one is at the top end, the desire from the very beginning has been the concept of joint planning with the Squamish Nation. And they've been busy, and I know through all these initiatives that are underway, I'm hearing from people that everybody wants the Squamish Nation involved. So in due time, there'll be collaboration and discussion with the Squamish Nation on governance in the water.
I just wanted to add that the Tsleil-Waututh Nation is actually, we met serendipitously through another meeting related to the estuary, and they're actually they've expressed an interest in setting up a discussion with them as well, because they do have some overlapping territory and are interested in marine planning as well.
And what we're calling Focus Area 2 now is focused on coastal ecosystems. And this one is very much, and you'll see the way I'm speaking about this right now is these are the ideas that have come forward, the desired outcomes, and we have to still vet them. So right now, the ideas that have come forward is a desire to promote awareness. There's a real sense of the need for education and awareness. So people will steward, more likely take action to steward as well if they're aware of what they're surrounded by. So this is about education, appreciation, and right now there's one action around interpretive signage. There could be more. There's a strategic direction around supporting current conservation and preservation. So this is more the core sustainable use on one side, and what about preserving and no-go zones or some kind of zoning concept around conservation and preservation. Then as we know, there's lots of ongoing restoration projects and habitat enhancement in Squamish, so this is celebrating what currently is going on in this strategic direction. And then resiliency, so this has this touches on the integrated flood hazard management process and plan. So this is just emphasizing that the plan mass supports that. And also, where possible, this philosophy of using nature's free services. So we have some great buffers out there. How can we use them to our advantage beyond going to engineered design ideas? And then monitoring assessment, which would make sense to have in a marine strategy, something that looks at not just, we heard again the words here are water quality. We heard a lot about dredging and reunion of the water system, but there was also, hey, what about baseline data and collecting information that can be used going forward? And marine economy, so definitely a mix of the thriving marine economy and that working waterfront and having that be in harmony with all the uses and aspirations. So Sarah and I noted that it came up a lot, that whole concept of access for all. So land and water access for all marine users. And these are the examples here, commercial, recreation, marine-based businesses. Channel navigability was huge, so we put it here. And the idea of planning for and developing so infrastructure, amenities, and facilities. We were given laundry lists of hopes, desires, wants, and needs for all the key infrastructure that would be needed and for a fantastic marine working waterfront. And so that is right now in Appendix 1. It's just a list, and eventually those things will come forward within actions going forward in action planning. But they're important things like pump out stations, making it easy for marine boaters to actually go do the right thing, and docking facilities for visiting boaters, and shared facilities. So the concept of recreation with business. And we pulled out Squamish marine industry because it is part of the thriving and the current marine economy, and so that has its own place here. And again, that's about access, and it brought out the concept of the transportation corridor. It's actually really interesting to see how important that is, as Squamish has a history. It was a hub for the marine economy, and now it's starting to morph that way as well, both on the recreation front and also from a safety and emergency perspective, in addition to industry, and then continued use for marine industry. And then new economies, putting in a placeholder for things we haven't thought about. thinking about now and into the future. And the last one is the gateway. And this is an important feature in the plan because this is that interface with the land and the sea and people coming in and where can they access, how do they get down to the water safely and in a way that's enticing both for the economy and also from a recreation perspective. So we have some ideas around waterfront trails, those connections, linkages with transit that comes up as well, and of course boardwalks and signage. So right now this is where the home for these ideas. And of course funding came up as well. So the question here is, well, what is the model? What's the strategy there? So who do we work with? So that's going to be refined further in this section. And tourism is a strong component in the economy, it's a strong component in the gateway, and the idea here is, well, can it be ecologically friendly? And I talked earlier about tradition and Squamish as a hub. Well, it has a strong Rain tradition, history, and culture, and so this strategic direction is about celebrating that and seeing what can we repurpose and use that currently exists, or can we bring back an old ship for viewing. And these last few slides are just about the last pieces of the document that we haven't finished yet, but the implementation section will just be a short piece that talks about clarifying roles and responsibilities, and of course some things the district would lead, some things it won't, and who will those be? So we'll tease that out here, and the whole point is where there are those jointly held priorities, that's where resources are used best, and that's kind of the essence of this section of the plan. And in action planning, of course, this is important because this will help drive future work plans and budgeting and resourcing. And measures, the whole concept of you want to be able to manage, you can't manage what you can't be measured, so the idea is to identify key measures for the actions, and that'll allow for checking progress over time, and even if there isn't progress, might help us identify why is that, and maybe identify ways to make the strategy more efficient. And in monitoring reporting. So then the plan will discuss how it will be periodically checked in with council and the community, and identify ways to assess both means and ends outcomes to assess again. If this focus area is what's important to us, the things that are we doing, is it getting us closer? What are the successes? Again, what are the barriers? How do we improve this document? Okay, and so for next steps, so we have gone once to the focus group, the stakeholder group, and they've just been contacted and alerted that there's focus session number 2 that's happening mid-March. And the idea will be really to dive into the strategies and actions, check on gaps, and then really ask the question, okay, who's leading, who can help here, what are the priorities, how could we resource this? So it's going to be a lot of that kind of discussion. So that ideally we're presenting a refined MAST in April. So it's a very tight time frame.
I just wanted to add as well, in the council report for this meeting, we also made a suggestion to host with council, if council is interested and in agreement, a workshop basically tied into the topic of shared leadership and governance. So through the marine strategy process, we have continued to receive input on the future of the Squamish Estuary Management Committee and the SEMP, the Estuary Management Plan rewrite. So that's been something that's just kind of been bubbling away within the community. We have been chairing SEMC, as council knows, for some time, but have seen declining participation by senior governments over time, and there's really a need that's been discussed. There's been workshops with SEMC to really revisit and find, basically look at different options for going forward, and rather than try and do that today or under the overarching MAST project, we wanted to host some dedicated deep dive discussion with council on that topic. So we've made that recommendation. We do have some resources left over to do this. And so we'll be looking for a blessing of council if you're in agreement there. And then right into council feedback and direction. So today what we're looking for from council is basically an indication based on what you see at this point in the process are we on the right track? Do you see any critical misses, things that we should be doing a bit more deeper diving? Do you have suggestions? As Sandra pointed out, really, what you're seeing is pretty raw, just sort of that very much working draft. We do have some additional engagement to come with focus group sessions to refine, but we thought it would be a great touch point with council. Yeah, so we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rice.
Thank you. And it was a good read. And I will say, I was one of the councillors at that engagement session in January, which I thought was remarkable. And the thing, having the speakers, as you outlined, from all of the different areas, I thought was just a masterstroke, because what it showed was that there's significant shared values and shared uses, and it doesn't have to be either or. And for example, one of the ones that struck me was the fellow that gives the boat tours to tourists, and how fascinated they are by the log booming and the deep seaport. So those things are not necessarily in conflict with that occupation at all. So it was a great evening, and I commend you for that. That was really a good one. I went through it, and I've got a number of them, but the one comment I'll make is you may recall some of the discussions we had at council about bringing this forward. I'm not sure if you were in the room, Sarah, or not, but because I think it was initially set for to start next year, and we moved it forward. And my reason for wanting to do that was because of the zoning pressure and the development pressure, primarily along the Blind Channel at that time. And now we've had also an indication of development pressure for the top of the Catamole area. And I wanted to make sure that as we started dealing with those proposals, that we had some idea of what our goals are as a municipal government, of what types of things we wanted to capture in the rezoning process for facilities, areas, etc. Because as you know, I mean, once it happens, it's almost impossible to go back and undo it. So to get that, and I didn't see that. What I saw going through those 4 areas in the different columns is we should identify kind of thing, but then when does the identifying happen? Is that something after this report? Is it part of this report? Is it something that's kind of in the next phase of this report? So I've got other things, but I'll just stop there with that comment for now.
Sure, and I'm happy to respond to that point out of the gate. Certainly we've identified I think it comes up in 2 different areas actually. In focus area 1, governance and shared leadership, the need to and the action around looking closely and devising a bit of a zoning strategy, because right now we have a lot of remnant industrial zoning within the Blind Channel, and we started to establish water zoning with the oceanfront zoning, but we haven't really touched or made the rest of it. Some of these things are already actually in play, certainly with now that we've got the official community plan underway and a marine gateway designation, we are already looking at and exploring the necessary zoning that we should consider as a bit of a, not sort of like a ad hoc zoning strategy, like one water lot over another, but like looking at the continuum, and some of it's being propelled by active land and water development applications and rezonings, but some of that's already in play and is part of the overall zoning review. Essentially, we'd be bringing forward a marine component to look at the zoning. So it's absolutely captured, and we do see it as a fairly high priority item. I think we gave it an H, a high. And just for council, with all of these emerging actions and who's involved, we put a bit of a placeholder, and based on the inputs that we are receiving, sort of a low, medium, or high, but those do need to be reviewed across all the actions, and we'll be discussing those prioritizations with the focus group as well. We're interested in council's input, if you have a sort of top 3 items, for example, that you think are the highest priority and you're seeing a mismatch here, then it would be a really good time to know if there's any disconnects.
If I might follow up with that. So I'm thinking zoning is certainly part of it, but in the zoning process, we sometimes look for specific things, facilities, community facilities, if you like. And so certain recreation facilities or certain space for certain industrial activities like fuel barge or something like that, for example. So is that what might come out of this report, identifying specific items like that from the stakeholders and different input?
Yeah, Mayor Hanson, through you, the part of that work to review both not only just the zoning, but where might we basically locate specific uses and then zone for that. So it does require a bit of an overall picture of what are all the needs for different infrastructure and facility, and where are those best positioned within our marine realm. So fueling dock, for example, may be appropriate in one part of the maybe in one part of the channel and not in the very upper reaches of the channel, for example. So we are going to be starting to, through the zoning, but then beyond, looking at what are the facilities and the infrastructure, the needs that are out there, where are they, and as you know, in some of the for example, through the oceanfront redevelopment, there are a number of amenities and facilities that are already planned there. So that makes it a little bit easier to know what's planned there. But then what are the gaps? So of the other boat lift and other facilities infrastructure, where can that go? So it's all tied into that specific action. And so that would be identified as an action, high priority to be resourced and implemented. So, as I said earlier, we are not going to have all of that zoning work done by the time we bring the marine strategy forward for endorsement. However, it will give us basically a sense of what are all the top actions that are high priority that we want to move ahead with.
I've got other stuff, but I'll step out for now.
Councillor Parker.
Yeah, thanks. Yep, it's, I don't know where to begin. The Mac Blind Channel, the waterfront here has been looked at for a lot of years, so I'm really happy to see it coming to the forefront. I see Tom Bluestart in the back there, and 35 years ago, he was the harbor master pushing what we're reading now. And so that makes me feel good. I think you had a great working panel. I thought that was good. Great group of people there, and we would get along. A lot of good stuff out of them. One thing I think that was missing, I saw the one slide said suggest what's missing. History. History's missing. We have to not forget there's some strategic locations along our waterfront that had either First Nations villages or where the first steam train came off the barge kind of thing. And so I think that history should be included in all our waterfronts, unlike what we're getting right now. In my opinion, should have some historical information for the walkway. As far as the bylaws go, I think it would be maybe prudent to put an overreaching bylaw out as soon as possible saying any future development coming on our oceanfront lands should consider, and then whether it's the appropriate place for a boat dock or not, all the wording should be so that any development coming forward will consider this future information. So someone wants to, I want to rezone my land. Well, we haven't finished this, but we'll get started on your rezoning and we'll see where this lands. Because, we don't have much land left. And, with the oceanfront and what's going on in the Blind Channel and the waterfront landing, there's really very little left. There's probably about 2,000 feet left of area where we could have some influence over. So I think, some kind of motion or bylaw that we could conjure up to just make sure we don't let anything slip by us at this point. You know, tourism, maps. I didn't see any maps, and you know, maps might come in handy when you go out. It might capture some of that history, but it would also give everyone that's participating a reality check on how little we have left to govern. There's not much. And anyway, I guess maybe I'll just leave it at that for now as well. But I think you're bang on. I think it's a great start, and it's the implementation portion that I'm really looking forward to. Thank you.
Thanks. This is a great starting document, and I appreciate the public engagement, the event that was held. My concern, I suppose, is the same as Ted's. When you're talking about industry and employment, we've already pretty much given away the entire shoreline of our waterfront. The remaining lands are in zoned industrial, which is employment land, and this suggests mixed use as well, which means we're going to get condos on top of ground floor retail space. And I will point out that on the very few lots that we have remaining, we need to do the same as Cleveland Avenue in implementing in employment, to guarantee that we have employment land, and maybe make it marine-based, or actually maintain some of that industrial zoning and not allow condo development on some of that industrial zoning, so that we can have a working waterfront and marine employment, or some sort of marine-based employment, and mapping out those lots so that we can ensure that zoning is aligned with employment in that area. I see a lot of what we've done already. We have across the Mamquam Blind Channel, which has already pretty much been set. The lots out front here, Michael Hutchinson's land out front here is already condos, some condos with no employment space. So I am deeply concerned for the marine economy that is stated in here, and I fear that we're just going to get more rezonings that won't have to do with any attachment to the marine economy. So, but you know, at this stage, I think that it's a fantastic. I love the structure and everything that's laid out, and I like where you're going with the zoning. I love the timing of everything. I think it's been really well done. So those are my concerns, but I'm hoping they don't play out as we go forward. Councillor?
Yes, couldn't come at a better time, obviously, and I think as far as the way we've got the clay shape so far, it's really great. It's nice and lean document. It's not too heavy with the wording or in its magnitude. And I agree with the comments here about the zoning. I think it's important to get out ahead of that. You know, we have all these precincts designated down in the oceanfront lands for industrial, and I think it's important to get out and make sure that they're commensurately zoned with the applications for those precincts, so that they all can work together and we don't get caught by surprise with some of the uses that might come up that don't tie in with them. It's obvious that we're pushing towards the water in every direction. That's really one of the only ways to go now in this community, so it's important to get out ahead of that zone.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's a great start. I think it's really critical that we ensure that this is dovetailing properly with the Squamish Nation marine strategy. And I'm not sure how far along they are with their planning. And their planning, of course, is territorial, so it's much broader than the scope of ours. But if we can ensure that we're not duplicating work, that we're being very cognizant of their goals and ambitions and processes, so that we're not competing with it, and we're collaboratively envisioning. And where there is overlap, make sure that in the action plans we're also collaborating. I think that's really important. You do reference a little bit in your report about how this may dovetail in with the Ocean Watch task force work that's going on. So I wouldn't mind sort of understanding that a bit better. and how through this action plan, we may be addressing some of those things within the Ocean Watch report that are outlined for local governments to be addressing. So really connecting that Ocean Watch report, the task force and the work that the task force is doing through the House on Community Forum, and how it's going to layer into this process, I think is really important. There's all sorts of land zoning pieces that are going to go with the water zoning, if you want to call it that, pieces of this. But it's this marine strategy is much more broad than simply land use. So, and that's sort of this is the territory that we're not used to weeding into, if I can use that term. We weed into land-based stuff all the time. The marine environment is very much a different animal, and so understanding how that interface happens, but also the connection between all these industries and needs and expectations is really important as well. I think the group, I wasn't at the meeting, but how Councillor Race articulated the collaborativeness of the group. We've started to see it in some other meetings we've had with all these entities, and it's the first time that all these groups are starting to actually get in a room together and actually talk about, shared values and vision and where the opportunities are to collaborate. And we've seen these start to accumulate over the last 6-7 months in terms of getting everyone in the same room together. So I think really positive steps on that front. But I don't know if you want to speak to the Ocean Watch Task Force stuff, and maybe I'll go to Councillor Races next anyway. So
Super. Yeah, great points. And just on your first point, just around dovetailing with this, the marine plan that Squamish Nation is working on. Certainly we've been at presentations through the House Sound Community Forum that Squamish Nation has delivered. We're aware of the work that they're doing. I know that with their election, they're kind of regrouping and whatnot. And so we're anxious, definitely, to reconnect with them. As early as late September, early October, we put out some information about what we're up to and an invitation to sit down, but we have not been able to do that to date, not for lack of keenness on our part, but we will get there for sure. And so we'll find out and confirm the spokesperson with the nation and then go from there. But absolutely, there's an interest and desire to dovetail.
Just on that, we are trying to get a council to council. They're going through orientation, so they've got some work to do, but we are trying to schedule a council meeting. It may be an opportunity for both of us to present where we are within our marine strategies and make sure there's that open dialogue happening at the council level, but also making sure it's happening at staff level.
Definitely. And we actually produced a neat poster for the Marine Forum that I'm sorry I didn't add into the council presentation today, but it's on our website as part of that package of material. But it does show the Squamish strategy in relation to the wide and growing regional initiatives that are underway. So it shows marine strategy and all the other grassroots and conservation stewardship things going on in Squamish, but then within the larger Sound, so it touches on and highlights the work of the House Sound Community Forum and then the sort of subcommittee around the Ocean Watch Task Force. I have not, Councillor Race has been our liaison, I think, at that task force level, and certainly I hope to get up to the next one. And I understand that there are a number of actions from the coastal or the Ocean Watch House Sound Edition report, and they actually have a bit of a platform too that I checked out, which is interesting. And certainly where there are opportunities to dovetail or to highlight actions that were involved in at that task force level within our marine strategy, we'll absolutely connect the dots. And then, as Sandra mentioned, I think in terms of the implementation, that this will be an important piece for us to refine and sort out in terms of the strategy. Is council interested in having, kind of an annual or not biannual, but basically updates as we go. Certainly in other communities, we've seen some really great implementation plans that have these periodic check-ins and then progress reporting. Here's where we're at on this action and this action, so that we can sort of keep the pedal on the accelerator and keep working away So we'll determine with council, maybe when we come back with more of the final draft, to determine what might be the best approach there.
I'll just go, in a second, I'll go to Councillor Race. One other piece that you talked a little bit about things that haven't started yet but are potential ideas in the future. And transportation from a transit point of view, whether it could be ferries, could be, like there's a whole transportation piece that I want to make sure is comprehensively incorporated into the marine strategy as well. Councillor Race.
Thank you. I actually have my hand up for something different, but I'll speak about the Ocean Watch just briefly. And just so everybody knows, it's a task force set up by the Howe Sound Forum to deal with some recommendations that came out of the Ocean Watch Howe Sound study. And what we're after at the moment is a study that is similar to one that was conducted by that group in Barkly and Clayoquot Sound that brought together a variety of stakeholders and created an online tool that in effect shows, and you can just, it's quite neat actually, you can highlight different things, for example, good areas for shellfish harvesting, good areas for log booming, sensitive areas for marine life in some form. And you can see all these different layers, and it's actually a kind of a visual cumulative effect study. And what it helps you do, it's really a tool for planning, and it helps you identify appropriate areas for certain things, and also if there's overlap between a sensitive area and a risk to that sensitive area, and how you mitigate that, then how do you mitigate that? So that's the goal. It's not on the same timeline as this. We're just looking for funding now, and likely it's about a 3-year study to collect all the data, but it's going forward. It would certainly be a useful tool for future decisions we have concerning our ocean front and the area around here. It doesn't deal with land, it's more directly ocean use. But that's the Ocean Watch part of it. The other, the reason I had my hand up was going back into the detail of this, and it comes under a number of things, and Sarah, you mentioned it, is the funding issue. And for me, there's two aspects of that, and one is the capital funding for various things, and what are the possible sources of that. But the other is the ongoing, I'll call it, for lack of a better word, the operational funding. And we've had discussions about that before in different groups within and without council about some kind of tax on water lots, for example, or tax on users, or is there some portion of the cost that should be spread amongst the entire community for things like enforcement, for things like periodic dredging, if it happens, or other maintenance type issues that might come up. And so I think, from my perspective, one of the things that this could cover is some of the options for us, and some of the, if it is going to be community-wide and just sort of out of our general tax revenues, what is the justification for that? Are there community-wide benefits? Are there some things that are more localized and should be sort of just aimed at certain users? So that was the reason I had my hand at that time.
Good point.
I have other points, but I'll step back again and let people talk.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you. So one of the things I was thinking about, because you have another focus session coming up, and this one around action planning, was one of the things that I really appreciated about the economic development plan that came forward to council was right from the beginning an acknowledgement that the District of Squamish wouldn't lead everything, that there are other people that need to lead, either because they have higher jurisdiction, or they have better access to funding, or they have the knowledge. And so I think in that table where we say who is involved, right, as we're trying to prioritize all the actions, it would be great to also see who is best to take the lead. Because I think it signals to the community right away that while this is a strategy developed by the district, those actions can't all be owned by us. If we want it all to take place, I think other people need to step up. And I think one of the exciting things about the Salt Life panel was to see that commitment and care and passion that is out there in the community around our marine environment. So I think we need to tell that story early on, that we're here to facilitate and support, but we don't necessarily need to lead everything. Or people shouldn't wait for us to lead everything, because we won't have the time or money if people want to accelerate things. So I think that would be an important question for me to see asked, that second focus group is around leadership.
Excellent point, thanks, Kelly. One other point I'll quickly make is, again, consideration of the federal ocean protection plan and how funding / various issues may be addressed through that plan as well. I know that's on the radar, I just wanted to make sure it was happening. Councilor Reyes.
Yeah, thank you. This is a bit more of a nitpicky thing, but in Focus Area 3, and I'm looking at page 35 of 3 of our council package, and it's talking about marine economy, and it's the objectives. And the first two, which is enable safe and effective access to coastal waters, avoiding user conflicts, identify land and water access needs, activate and secure public access in the waterfront, are shown as medium priorities, and below that there's some with high priorities. And I thought that, going back to my first comment, that was one of the, to me, that's one of the most immediate needs, is to start identifying these things. And so I'll let you consider whether that's medium or whether it should be maybe pushed up the ladder a little bit. Because I think that's kind of, from my perspective, that's kind of foundation for, at least for certain areas, the sensitive areas which are subject to development around the peninsula.
And really the reason why we ramped it up into this year, so we could get ahead of that.
Councilor
Yeah,
Fletcher.
thanks. Well, kind of to that point, so let's say the guy that has the land, he's got 500 feet of waterfront. He brings in a DP next week, and this isn't completed yet. Can we say to him, oh, well, as soon as this is done, we'd like this use to be over here on your land and this over here. I mean, you know, back to my point about doing something to the bylaw now. I mean, can we after zone things?
Mayor, answer through you. At the, a lot of the waterfront lots will require rezoning. So there's, that would be a discretionary deliberation around that rezoning approval for council. We want to be able to be opportunistic, and if there are places and areas for water-dependent uses, for example, that can't be easily secured or located in other places, then we can sort of highlight those for council and have some discussion around how we're able to, through regulation, make sure that whether we're able to secure different areas for appropriate uses, so we can have those discussions. Off the cuff, it's hard to sort of highlight what, like all of the different examples. But sorry.
I said we don't know them yet. We haven't completed this, and so I'm just saying if something comes in prior to us completing this, are we still going to be able to have the opportunity to say, you know, this is the only place in town where a boat ramp's going to go. It's on your property. Will we be able to say that?
Well,
Yeah, maybe you want to come and join the table there.
So any
This is our director.
director of community planning here on Squamish, if we receive a new application, obviously we would plug into the marine strategy process that's ongoing to look for direction or early direction in things that we're missing. Absolutely, but I guess there's two ways you can process applications. You can, you know, especially at the rezoning stage, you can just deny them if we don't have all the plans finished, or we could process them parallel to what's going on with the marine strategy.
Okay, that's what I just wanted to make sure we were saying that. Sounds good.
I did, there are a few community members in the audience, so we want to be very collaborative in our committee meetings. So if you have any questions or comments, anyone who's in the audience, mostly staff out there, but just invite you, just put your hand up and either come to the podium or sit at the table if you have a question or comment about what's in front of us. Council, any more questions or feedback for everybody? Sarah?
Well, I'm just going to reiterate, a map would be good.
Oh, I think this thing will be,
Yeah,
there'll be maps galore in this,
okay.
and layers of maps. Yeah, go ahead.
Just briefly, and you mentioned a council workshop, and speaking for myself, I'd certainly be happy to participate in something like that. I think that'd be a great idea.
Excellent. Anyone? Tom, you want to add a few 2 cents? Are you good? You good?
Listening.
Okay. What's that?
Listening.
Excellent. Okay, well, that's all that's on the agenda. You guys think you have enough feedback to?
Yeah, and just to maybe make sure that we have kind of good marching orders. From Councillor Race, I heard that in terms of deep diving, looking at the funding options and exploring, going a little bit further to explore different ways of funding a lot of the things that need to happen, or for example around the dredging program. So deep diving a little bit on that, deep diving on, to Councillor Elliott's point around differentiating leads versus supporting roles and actions of others, that so that it's not solely just a District of Squamish laundry list, although I imagine we'll have a good share of the actions, but definitely bringing in other actions. And to that point, I just also wanted to highlight what we haven't done, and at our focus group and at the public forum, we didn't have a lot of agencies join us, so we're actually taking a different tactic and doing more outreach in this next stage to go to Coastal Health, go to Transport Canada, Ministry of Environment, and as well as Squamish and Slave Nation. So doing a bit more outreach on that front to have a look at different actions that they might be working on that could be partnership opportunities that will add and layer into this as well. But otherwise, the deep dives I heard were those 2 key ones, and unless there's anything else.
That's correct.
Yeah, just history. History.
Thank you, yeah.
And the mayor was talking about First Nations a lot, and so I'm pretty sure she covered all and everything that in case, I mean, that's a big.
Yeah, and I think you hit it there a bit, like who wasn't in the room that should be in the room. Federal and provincial agencies that may be important in the process.
Any other questions from council? Don't see any. Thanks, good job. Much appreciated. Motion to terminate the committee of the whole. Moved by Councillor Elliott, second by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.